Hey, what's going on, ISM? We're back with another Tuesday Talk. Today we are joined by the one and only Alex Ferren. Alex is currently on staff at the national office for the Assemblies of God with CMN, Church Multiplication Network. Alex and I went to college together. We lived in the same, not necessarily hall, but the same dorm building. And we served together on the leadership team of Crosswalk at Evangel. Alex, thanks so much for being on with this Tuesday Talk.
Hey, it's great to be here. Great to join you guys.
Yeah, awesome. Super excited to have this conversation. You know, Alex is one of those that as he's fleshing out his calling and different things, like he's pursuing it, and it's so cool. Such a challenge and encouragement to anybody that feels the call of God in their lives. So you know, we just kind of want to unpack this just for this episode. You know, just having this kind of understanding. Last week we talked to Chris Pinkston, who's in Dayton, and he's a youth pastor there. He was a youth pastor up here, and so he kind of transitioned, and we talked about what that looks like. What does the call of God look like in transition, and how difficult that can be, and different things like that. But this week we want to kind of still play off of that, still understand what that looks like. So if you could, talk a little bit about your ministry journey, starting at Evangel and continuing on through with the National Youth Office and CMN and all that.
Yeah. So my ministry journey has kind of been one that hasn't been a straight line whatsoever. It's been a lot of zigzags where you go, Lord, why am I here? And then the answer comes a little bit later. So kind of felt called to ministry. I think I was 16 at a youth camp. I was an intern that year at camp. And so they said, you're doing the lyric slides tonight. And so I remember specifically, this moment where I'm back, and I was actually really upset that I had to do the lyric slides that night. Someone else was assigned it, and last minute they bailed. And so they're like, okay, Alex, this is what you're doing tonight. And so I was sitting back there upset and kind of angry that I was having to do this. And I specifically remember this point, like looking out over the crowd of people worshiping, and just feeling like the Lord said, this is what I've called you to do, is to lead my people into worship. And at that time, and still to this day, I am not a worship leader. I don't have a musical bone in my body. And so part of my ministry journey has been kind of discovering what it means to lead people into worship. And, as you go through the Psalms, as you go through scripture, Jesus's ministry, you find out that your whole life is worship, that every breath you breathe can be worship to the Lord. And so I've really interpreted my calling to ministry as leading people into lifelong discipleship with Jesus. So that calling led me to Evangel, where we met, kind of had a bunch of random experiences at Evangel too, where led discipleship in a whole dorm. So helped small groups of guys gather around the scripture, gather around Christ and talk. Led a ministry team there. So I got to preach all over the country, just talking to people about Jesus. And then after college, I ended up finding a job at the National Youth Office. The funny story behind that is I actually did not want to do that. I had a couple of jobs lined out as youth pastors on the East Coast. I was interviewing for one in particular. But at the same time, I was dating a girl. And if you know how that goes, you ask people, like, what do I do? Like, I really like this girl. I think this is going to go somewhere. And I also really want to jump into ministry. And one of my mentors goes, what's the point in learning how to do ministry alone just to figure out how to incorporate her later? And I was like, that's a pretty good point. And so I applied to be the executive admin of the national youth director at the time. And so that's what I did for 2 years. I kept his calendar. I booked flights for him. I answered calls and emails for him, and just served him. And that was a humbling experience. You think of ministry as, being preaching in front of people, talking to people about their life. But it is a lot of organization and just keeping up with things, and really learned a lot of skills along the way there. And then at the beginning of 2018, had the opportunity to transition to the Church Multiplication Network. where I now serve with the network development team. So we talk to students, we talk to college students, youth pastors, executive pastors, anybody who's interested in not just church planting, but seeing the church multiplied. That's kind of who we talk to, and we're building a network of relationships with people. We believe here at the Church Multiplication Network that it's not your talent that's going to keep you in ministry. It's actually the level of your network and the people who are around you that are going to help you through tough times. So that's been my job for the last almost 3 years, has been just supporting people, bringing them in, integrating them into the network. And then just in a month, my wife and I are transitioning from Springfield, Missouri to Kansas City, Missouri, where we plan to start a church of our own. So we're in the middle of transition, trying to find jobs, trying to find an apartment. We actually just spent like an hour on the phone with a realtor trying to figure out what kind of tiny apartment we can afford when we move to Kansas City.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of transition.
Yeah. So if you could, what for you, as God has transitioned you, and you had talked about, had those conversations, God, why am I in this place? And then you get those answers. What does that look like? For you, what does that look like in feeling the transition, feeling the call of God, in different things? Because I'm sure that, we've had conversations where like church planting has always been on your heart, just that, kind of that understanding. So it's like, this isn't something that's brand new where you're just like, you know what, now that I'm part of CMN, I think I'll, no, it's always, and God works in incredible ways where almost where we're at now is always preparation and where we're going. It's never been one of those where it's like, okay, we're going to stop here completely and then move on. It's always been, this is a building block to the ultimate calling that God has for us, and whatever that looks like. So for you, could you talk a little bit about how that feels? How does it feel to experience the call of God? How does that feel to pursue the call of God, and how does that feel to wait for the call of God? Because that's a big one too, is just waiting for where God's got
you. Yeah. So the best word I have to describe that is, it's just ambiguous. I brought up, when I first felt called, the Lord used this term worship for me, and it was kind of just figuring out what that meant. And then for a while, I thought, maybe youth ministry is the direction of my life. I was in a youth group. I loved my youth pastor. He had poured into me. And, as at every step of the journey, it feels like a little bit more clarity has come with it. And so for me, it was ultimately just trying to be faithful to what I was doing in the season that I was in. And throughout the whole process, the Lord had provided doors and opportunities to take just one small step. So, I don't know that as a 16-year-old, I had this idea that I'm going to be planting a church in Kansas City, and here's all these ideas. I really had just a vague word from the Lord, and kind of just knowing that pastoral ministry is where I'm going. So every step, the Lord seemed to bring more and more clarity to that. But it was pretty frustrating to begin with, because, I wanted to know, how do I do this? I wanted the map, and the Lord was just saying, hey, just follow me. He didn't have a map to give me. He was just saying, follow my footsteps, follow my voice. And I think that's kind of the tension we all feel. We want the map. We have our iPhone, and we have our maps, and we know exactly where to go. And the way of the Lord is kind of like, he's all about intimacy with him. And so he's wanting us not to have the map in front of us. He's wanting us to focus on his voice. He's wanting us to focus on his back and just following him as he goes. And so that was kind of how I would describe the process, is just, it was one step at a time. It was a lot of just not missteps, but just saying, Lord, is this what you're leading me to? And then I've also always been someone who's just like, Lord, I'm going to keep moving. And if you've got a hard no, you got to check me. You got to let me know. And I'm just going to keep going the best I can. And I think a lot of people have this idea that he's giving clear direction. You've heard from the Lord. There was a burning bush in your office, and you're like, okay, that's exactly what I'm supposed to do. But I think it's a little bit more ambiguous than that. But as you learn his voice, you kind of learn what it is to be in obedience. You learn what it is to follow him. So I know that was kind of all over the place, but ambiguous is the best term I have for following the will of God. It's you learn his voice, and
Yeah.
you do your best to follow him.
Yeah, and that's so important. Just that understanding of we don't have to have all the answers to know that God's got us.
Yes.
We don't have to, like, even me moving up here, it's like I got this job right out of graduating, and then I headed on up here, and it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, God, okay,
Yes.
you gotta be in control. I didn't know anybody here. I didn't know
Yep.
anything here. Everything was just completely alien between, and Cleveland's really different than Springfield, Missouri, so
Yep.
it's just definitely one of those moments to sit there, and ambiguous is a good descriptive word on that.
Something I've recently come across has been kind of two terms that help me think through the will of God, that there is a general will of the Lord and there's a specific will of the
Right.
Lord. So a general will is that Jesus said, love your neighbors as yourself. That's general. All of God's people should be loving their neighbor. He said, go into all nations and make disciples, baptize them in my name. He gives these general commands, these general directions for us. And then there's the specific moments where, how I love my neighbor is probably going to be a little different than how you love your neighbor, because needs are different. That person is different. And so there's those specific ways that we follow the general call of God. And so, like, for those of us who are still trying to determine that, if we just commit to following the general commands of God, love your neighbor as yourself, be faithful to the things he's called you to, that specific calling, I think, becomes much more clear, and it develops from that intimacy of knowing what his general call is. And so I found that kind of helpful as I thought through what the Lord's been leading me to.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
What about, in this, as you're pursuing there's always that time of almost but not yet. You kind of get that stirring in your heart, and you're not really understanding. God hasn't released you, or whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
How do you battle against frustration in those? Like, for you specifically, what are some ways that you've been like, okay, I can't be frustrated in this? Or because we're all human, right? We all want to, and
Yeah.
even for us, like, it's not a bad thing to have zeal for the Lord. It's not a bad thing to
For
to be all that God has called us to be. But at the same time, God knows, in his grace and in his wisdom, understands that we can't be all that he wants us to be right now, because we gotta be moving through that stuff. So what are some ways for you that you battle against frustration, or depression, whatever that looks like, with all that stuff?
Yeah. So the struggle for me has always been, I'm very futuristic. I'm always looking and dreaming about the next thing, the next season, what's next. And so I've found that I have a tendency to be absent-minded in the present, because I'm always thinking about the future. And so for me, that was kind of my struggle. I was always looking to the next thing. And so the only thing I've really been able to do to prevent that is kind of leaning into Jesus's words that the worries and the things of tomorrow will take care of themselves. Look after the problems of today. And so I've interpreted that as, where I'm at right now, I need to do the best I can. And honestly, doing the best I can consumes most of my time. It consumes most of my energy. It consumes most of my emotions. And so I don't have a whole lot of margin to go to those other places and to dwell on those other things. And so for me, it's been figuring out, Lord, what do I do right here, right now, to remain faithful to you? Because even in that, he's preparing me and forming me for what's next. I think for me, I'm also a planner. So I'm futuristic and I'm a planner. And so I want to spend my time planning and developing and preparing for that next season. And I think whenever we're faithful to simply doing what we are, God has a way of his spirit forming us for that anyway. Yeah. So he's not concerned with me having the best laid plans. He's concerned with the shape of my heart and the character of my soul. And when I'm faithful to where I am and what I'm doing, he's able to shape that. He's able to do it way better, and he's able to prepare me way more than my best laid plans. And so that's kind of how my wife and I have worked through that. And we've just said, we can't allow ourselves to dwell on those things. And dreaming is important. And we have moments where we're like, okay, let's cut loose and let's write down everything we'd love to see the Lord do in our future. And then we have to go, okay, now is the time to kind of put that away, put that to the side, and say, how do we remain faithful where we're at, and to the church community that we're at, in the jobs and the roles we're in, to the people we're around? How do we be faithful to them?
Yeah, that's good. That's great. So kind of, let's turn the corner here as far as like what that looks like for students, right? So watching this, feel like they've got the call of God in their lives. Like, would you speak, what would you say to challenge or encourage students who are so the first group of students are those who have gotten their calling and they're seniors, right? And so they're ready to go. They're ready to go to ministry school or wherever that looks like. They're seniors now. And then the second group of people are those who have gotten their calling, but not necessarily who are like in sixth grade. Like I want to be. I know that I'm going to be a pastor. In sixth grade.
Yeah.
And it's like, but now what do I do? Because I'm a kid. I'm a student. What are some encouragements you'd have for both of those? And then even that third ring of students who haven't, like, they're like, I don't know what I'm called to do. Like I'm pursuing my general calling, like you said, but not necessarily. I don't know what I'm called to do past that. So those people, what are some challenges and encouragements that you give them?
Man, well, for that third group who has said, I haven't felt something specific from the Lord yet, I'd say just keep pursuing that general call. And I think the Lord has a way of kind of leading us down a trail and through a journey of discovering. And a big part of your calling is related to like your passion, your strengths. My younger brother, from a pretty early age, I'd say mid high school, he felt like he was called to steward the finances of the kingdom. Like that has been a pretty clear trajectory for his life. And so he kind of took that as like, I'm going to own my own business. I'm going to be in finances. I'm going to be able to fund the work of the ministry by these things. And so just because you haven't heard a call that says you're going into pastoral ministry doesn't mean that the Lord doesn't have something special for you. So I'd say just keep pursuing those things. For the sixth grader who feels a pastoral call, pastoral ministry is not related to a title. It's related to how you care for the people around you. And so some of the most pastoral people have never carried the title of pastor.
Yeah.
And so I think there is this moment where we go, Lord, I'm committed to caring for and loving the people around me long before I have the title pastor in front of my name. So it's learning to listen before we speak, to be loving instead of hating. It's learning to just care for people where they're at and to be the presence of Jesus for them. And so I think for those who are way off, just know that the Lord is shaping and he is discipling you and he's forming you in the place that you're at, that it doesn't take you going to a particular place for the Lord to form you. He is present with you. He's working on you. He's moving. For the senior who's getting ready to go to college, enjoy the place that you're in. Enjoy the place that you're going. Honestly, like Galen and I, like my evangel experience was probably one of the most formative experiences of my life. I had a ton of fun. I made a ton of lifelong friends, learned an immense amount about both ministry and just about the Lord. And so I have a tendency to jump ahead to the next season, to my career, to my ministry position, my role. And one of the things I tell college is enjoy your time there. Don't jump too far ahead. Enjoy the season that you're in, because the Lord is working and is forming you in the midst of those things. It's not in spite of those things. Sometimes you can get to this idea of going like, I want to get to that place, and that's where the Lord will do all those things. But he's actually working on you where you're at, as long as you're allowing him to do those things. So learn to grow in the place and the season that you're in before you move on to a ministry role, a position. Because at the end of the day, the title means very little. The title and the role mean very little, but being teachable and humble and prepared to serve where you are, those are probably far more important than any other trait.
Yeah, it's really good. Just to speak onto that, those kids that have a ways to go. They're still, they know they're calling. Maybe it's like, I'm called to be a doctor, but I'm in 7th grade. Whatever.
Yep.
It's like how great is it that you get to know? Like, I didn't get my calling until I was a senior in high school. So it's like.
Yeah.
And it was because I was like, I want to be a chef. That's all I want to do. I just want to cook, make a ton of money, maybe get a show on Food Network. It'll be great. Kind of one of those,
Yep.
we always romanticize things. And then God just had other plans. It was one of those where it's just closed doors, and then open doors, and
yep.
So sometimes, like for me, going into, to speak to those who have their calling, it's so great that you it, start working towards it. Don't, you're called to be a student right now. But at the same time, like during those student times, you can be pastoral. You can be, you can read books about psychology, or you can read books about anatomy and phys, or whatever that look, physiology, like different things like that, like medicine. Like it doesn't, even if you're, like you said, your brother was called to be, to do business and to understand and be good stewards of the resources of the kingdom. Like you can pick up a book about economics, you can read, whatever that looks like. And so there's a lot of greatness that comes from that. But at the same time, I know for me, just that enjoying where you're at, enjoying where you're going. I remember the first day I walked into my intro to theology class, and I was sitting there, and like all these, like I don't come from a pastor background, so like I'm like, well, my parents are in the medical field, like that's it, that's all I got, like I don't have, we're not these, 4th generation pastors. And so I look around, and you've got 3rd and 4th generation, like, yeah, my great grandfather was a pastor, and one day I'm going to take over his church. He just passes it down, all these different things. And so these guys understand big theology words, and different things like I don't know what sanctification is. I don't know what atonement is. I just know that I'm saved and I'm called. That's it. That's all I know.
Yep.
And so having that moment to sit there and say, man, like I've got a lot to learn. But then just enjoying that season, enjoying that part of learning and understanding. And I got to, like, I learned as much as I possibly could from anybody, as long as I could learn it. I wanted to learn it. And I still love to learn, new stuff and everything.
Yeah. And what I love about your story, because I think it illustrates like the fact that you wanted to be a chef and you kind of pursued that, doors were closed, that time wasn't wasted. You know what I mean? Like we can often think like, oh, I took a detour, but I think our God is the God of the detour, where he goes with us on our journey a little bit, and he leads us back to the road he wants. But that time isn't wasted. That time isn't irrelevant. That time isn't a time in which the Lord has left you, but rather he's using it to shape your future and to shape your perspective and to shape your, your calling. And so I guess my advice is nothing's wasted. No time is wasted. Right. The Lord is using it all.
Yeah. That's really good. Even now, like I get to cook for students, or we got church potluck. I'm on it.
Yes.
Just those different things for us. But that's so good to sit there and view everything that you go through as something building towards what you're inevitably going to be doing.
I think I speak for literally the entire audience. We would all love you to have a cooking show. Even now, just make a youth pastor. Yes.
maybe, it is really interesting the way that God, moves and does different. Even here, my background with like, just with my family background and different things, my story like has helped so many, like it's helped me be on the same page with students, you know, being able to love students through all that junk. Cause I went through some of the junk, you know, different things like that, where it's like, it's always really interesting to see how God uses every part, not just the little parts, not just the specified, okay, I'm going to go to college specifically for this, but even the parts of, you know, I was just on this random, you know, rampage of watching all these YouTube videos about woodworking, you know, now God's using me in woodworking, you know, whatever that looks like for us. So that's really great. You know, that's great advice for every single student to understand that where you're at, God is using where you're at to build onto the next thing. It provides what we're doing now provides the foundation for what we're going to do later, and then so on and so forth.
And I think something I've found more and more often, the experiences that I asked, why, Lord, I prayed like, God, why am I going through this, have sometimes been the most beneficial for me, because, you know, I had moments in college where, you know, we were just going through financial stuff and just didn't know if I was going to be able to go back. Like, there was just that unknown. And I remember just time after time praying, God, why is this happening? I feel so insecure. It's awkward to talk about money. Like, will I have to call my friends and go, hey, I'm not going to come back this year? And it were moments like that have allowed me to have so much more empathy and compassion on those who are going through similar just uncertainty, similar moments. And when the moments I prayed, why, God, have been very impactful on my ministry now. And so I guess another challenge is, don't make a snap judgment on what God is doing in the moment, because it's only 2020. It's only looking back that we go, oh, like, I totally understand what the Lord was doing now. So it's important also to just have that perspective, to not just condemn, this is a moment that's not going to be used at all, because the Lord can redeem it all.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, don't be like the Israelites, you know, in the desert, you know, where we should just go back. It's like, no, you don't see what God has done to get you to this place, you know. Just continue to have faith that He'll continue to do that. That's awesome. That's great. And even, you know, even in the bad things that we go through, even in the rough times, in the low times, God still redeems that. You know, just that understanding of God is a God of redemption. He's not a God of, you know, He doesn't just sit there and be like, all right, well, you got to be perfect now in order to do this. No, He uses all of our junk to be weaponized against the army of darkness, you know. So that's great. Just a few more questions here, you know, as we wrap up this conversation. But, you know, for students right now, we're having things open back up. Summers are now, you know, we're not sure what we're going to do with summers. We can't go to the beach, but we can go to the beach, but we can't, you know, kind of thing. And just those moments. But right now in a student's life right now, you know, let's just, you know, what are some things that you wish that you would have known, or you would have been told as you're a student pursuing God, you know, as a student pursuing God's calling, you know, well, that encompasses the one that's about to leave, that encompasses the one that knows, that's preparing, and that encompasses the one that doesn't know. You know, what would you say, what's one thing that you're like, man, I really wish that I knew this when I was 16 and just got my calling, or when I was 15 and had no idea what I was supposed to do?
Something that I do now that I didn't do then, and I wish I had, was just to ask people to have coffee with me. Like, even the people I was like, this person would never agree. They have a high position, or they're a senior pastor somewhere, or they're, you know, doing this grand thing. They would never want to talk to me, was kind of how I thought through things. I wish I had had more of those moments, because I found that those moments have been like life shaping, when I was able to have a conversation with someone I looked up to, and they were just able to speak into my life. They were able to speak to my situation. And they're always much more accessible than I think they are. They're always much more willing to talk to me than I think they are. So even just regardless of where you're at on the journey, just have coffee with someone, share a meal, see if you can talk on the phone with someone who's doing what you want to do or you think you want to do. If you're uncertain of your calling, of where the Lord's leading you, just try a few things. Talk to someone in ministry, hear their experience, talk to someone in the medical field, talk to people who are doing things that you want to do, because hearing others' stories is kind of how we begin to shape our own story. And so I would just say, go for it. There's literally no harm in sending a text or sending a Facebook or Instagram message. It doesn't harm anyone. And if they say no, then they say no. That's the worst that can happen. Like, that's all that can happen. So I would say just reach out to people and, talk to people you admire and you trust. Spend your summer doing that. Make it a goal to talk to 2 people a week or 1 person a week, something like that, to grow and to learn and to kind of get some guidance along the way.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Awesome advice. And then finally, final question, a little lighthearted, as soon as you guys, you guys move up to Kansas City, you find your apartment, you get all, settled in. I know that you're originally from Kansas City, right? So, you know the area a little bit, but like, what's the first thing, you're going to do, or like first restaurant you're going to go eat at? What's that one thing you're like, man, as soon as we get to Kansas City, this is what's happening?
That's a good question. I haven't done enough thinking about that. I haven't thought through actually being there. So my favorite, I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for my wife. My favorite restaurant is this barbecue place called Q39. It's on 39th Street, just down the street from our neighborhood. It's actually in our neighborhood. And the best briskets and burnt ends I've ever had. Oh, I'm contemplating driving there right now because it's so good. And Kansas City has a claim for barbecue. Like, we fully believe we have the best barbecue in the world, and Q39 proves that correct. So that's probably the first place. The second thing, I hope baseball comes back, because one of my favorite things to do is to listen. I like listening to a baseball game even more than being there. There's something just really therapeutic and fun about just, a summer night and a baseball game on. So I hope baseball comes back and I can listen to the Royals game. So those are kind of the couple of things. Man,
that sounds good. I gotta come by Kansas City and get some.
Please do. Get some barbecue.
Awesome. Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on and for having that conversation with us just about calling. It's so important for us to to see us. Not necessarily, we do these talks to encourage and challenge students to grow deeper in their faith and deeper with the relationship with God, but also, to be all in for what God has for them. And so definitely that is evident in your life throughout all the years of me knowing you. You've been very much so pursuing what God has for you in the season that you're in, and planning and preparing for the season that he's got. So I'm super excited to see what God has for you as you move to Kansas City, and as you look to church plant and all that fun stuff that looks like. But super excited for you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you guys, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, there you have it. Our final, or not our final, but another Tuesday talk. We'll have another one next week. But thank you so much for joining us for this Tuesday talk. Don't forget Thursday night. All right, Thursday night we're going to be having still our Devo, and then Wednesday night we'll have our first online service. So you're not going to want to miss that either. That's tomorrow night. So be a part of that on our YouTube channel. But other than that, have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday. Love you guys, and we'll talk to you later.